Welcome to This Is How We Create, a show that digs deeper into the creative life of contemporary artists of color. Discover what feeds their creativity and how they found or are finding their artistic voice. Through these intimate and candid conversations, you'll gain insights into the lives of creative professionals of color that are hard to find anywhere else. Hey friends, welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin, your host. So last week we talked about knowing when you're ready to hire your first helper, your first person. And this week we're going to talk about the screening process, specifically the questions you should be asking that I didn't ask when I first started interviewing. Interviewing is my favorite thing, and I am a really, really hard interviewer. I have that reputation, but I'm hard for a reason. I will tell you about my madness. But in episode 1, in part 1 of this series, I talked about a person who didn't work out, and the one that I kept on for a year, despite knowing at 6 months that they were wrong for my photography business. So I think I could have avoided that entire mess if I'd asked better questions up front. That's what makes me a good interviewer now, because I made all the mistakes. So I had asked about their experience when they were interviewing with me, about their availability. They were going to be an intern, so that was all cool, the logistics, but I didn't ask the question that would reveal whether or not they actually cared about the things that I cared about as an employer, whether they saw quality the same way I see quality, whether they were the kind of person who sweats the details or just does the minimum amount of work. And yeah, that cost me a lot of time, but that was my mistake, which I'm not going to make anymore. But I want to talk to you about what to do when you're screening your candidates and the questions that will save you months upon months of resentment and money. When you are interviewing or when you're considering people, I want you to look first beyond the resume. Their skills are going to be table stakes, right? The skills get you in the door. They're necessary, but not necessarily sufficient. But you can teach someone to use project management software. You could teach them about lighting. You could teach them how to prep your canvases, but you can't teach them to care. And oftentimes you can't teach them a good attitude. What you're looking for in the screening phase is values alignment. Do they approach the work the same way you do? Do they care about things the same way you care about things? And I have to say, I find that I'm in the sweet spot of my life because I have the best producer on the podcast that we've had so far, and his name is Daniel, and he's going to be looking at this. So I love you, Daniel. Now, why is Daniel so great? Well, he's great because of culture fit, which sounds very corporate, but for a creative business, especially a teeny weeny one of one person, it's everything. So you're not really building a corporation, but you are building something that reflects how you see the world and how the world sees you. The person you hire needs to be someone who gets that. When it comes to that, how do you figure it out? How do you get to that point? Some of the things that I do even before the interview process is I look at what they've written. I ask for, if I do an ask, right? So if I say on social media, I am looking for X person to help out. And the way that I hire is really different. At first, I hired by word of mouth. And if you're starting out, maybe that's how you do it. You could hire a friend. You could have people do one-off jobs through Fiverr, whatever it is you do. If you're looking for someone to spend quite a bit of time with you, I love to send out a message and I ask them to do a very specific task in the message. So if I'm looking, for example, when I was looking for someone to help with the podcast years ago, one of the things that I did is I sent out a message to all my friends and I posted on social media and I described what I'm looking for. And in terms of what I'm looking for, one of the things I ask for is that they have to be grace under fire. And then 2, they have to not take themselves too seriously. A sense of humor is always helpful. And then what I do, which is this little trick that I do, is I will have an ask in the email. And the ask will say something simply like, if you are interested, send a cover letter and an email to this address. And now for them to be able to apply, it has to be, for me anyway, this is how I know that it's important, because again, I always look for people who have attention to detail. So I ask them to do a very specific thing. And so then if they end up doing that thing, and that thing will be send an email to this address and send me your cover letter, which means that they have to go out of their way to do this. They can't DM me, or if they do, then I know that they're not a good fit, because one, attention to detail means that they have to have read through the whole thing. So that's one way that I do it. And then from there, you set up meetings with them. You look over a resume if they have a resume, or you read their cover letter to see how they align. And I know that I'm super old school cover letter. You're like, Martine, seriously. But I find that it's that one place where you can see if the person is able to go an extra mile. All right. So when you are doing that interview, you want to ask about their past work, but you have to make it specific in terms of the questions you ask. Saying, tell me about your experience might not be so specific, but you might say, tell me about a time when you had to deliver something under a tight deadline. What did you prioritize and why? And as they answer that question, you're listening for what they valued in that moment. Did they prioritize the relationship with the client? Did they prioritize the quality of the final product, the assets that they were getting delivered? Or were they just about getting it done? And the answer will tell you what they care about. What people say matters, and people are using words. Look at the body language as they're telling you what they're saying. Is their body language betraying their words? Asking these questions are important. One of the things I like to do is tell me about a project you're really proud of. What made it great? And if they talk about overcoming challenges, problem solving, if they talk about collaboration, well, that tells you something. If they talk about just finishing it, that tells you something else. And what's that thing? Well, the work that I do as a photographer is super collaborative. Even the work that I do on the podcast, it's very collaborative. It means that you end up working with people and you spend hours upon hours, sometimes 10, 12 hours working with someone. And sometimes you're just talking about whether or not, you might spend, photography is so grueling when it comes to details. You might end up spending, and this has happened, about 30 minutes on which photo is the best photo to have in the background of a photo. All these things really matter, and clients want detail. So detail's important in my line of work. I love to ask about mistakes that they made and what they learned. And I think that this is big. So I say, tell me about a time that you made a mistake at work and what happened. How did you handle it? And the perfect candidate is never going to say they never made mistakes. The perfect candidate will tell you about real mistakes. They're going to own it without making excuses and what they learned. Now, pay attention to the red flags here. Someone who blames others. Well, my boss didn't give me clear instructions, or the client kept changing their mind. That is someone who won't take ownership when things go wrong. And they probably are going to bring the same thing in your business as well. So if also you ask them, why did you leave your other job? If they say they just didn't appreciate me, or I did so much work and they never seemed to give me the promotion that I needed, or I was overlooked, that could be true. But I would also do a reference check. Half the time, if someone is complaining about someone else and how awful that boss was and how they didn't appreciate them, 9 out of 10, I think what ends up happening is the fact that that person was the problem, not the boss. So much about working with people is about goodness of fit. That's what it is about. It's about goodness of fit. They either get it or they don't. They either do the work or they don't. And if they don't do the work, were they willing to listen? Were they willing to improve? Were they willing at all? And that's really important. So you want to ask also about how they take their feedback. One of the things I say is, tell me about a time where you received really critical feedback and how did you respond? If you hire someone for your creative business, there will be moments where you need to say, this isn't quite right. Can you redo it? You're going to send notes. You need someone who can hear that without getting defensive or shutting down. These are the questions, these screening questions I ask after the 7-minute mark. The first 7 minutes of an interview for me, the first question I ask is, what do you know about the job description? What do you know about me or about whatever, XYZ? And then I also ask them, tell me about yourself. So then once we get past that, then we ask the other questions. Okay. So more red flags. If people get defensive, if they're not engaging with curiosity, then, that could be a problem for you. Ask them about how they like to communicate, how they like to take feedback, as we mentioned. Some people thrive on constant check-ins and some people want autonomy. Neither is really wrong, and you might work one way versus the other, but it really needs to be a goodness of fit. So if you're someone who likes to check in weekly and need daily affirmation, and the person isn't like that, that could be a mismatch. If you're someone who can run with minimal oversight, figure out how you operate before you hire anyone. And here's what I do now that I didn't do then. I give a small paid trial project before making any commitments. I'm not talking about free work, but something that's small that if it doesn't work out, then we've both only invested just a few hours. I really go out of my way to do this because this is where you can see the truth. Do they follow directions? Do they ask clarifying questions when something's unclear? Do they deliver on time? Do they put a lot of thought into the work, or do they just check the boxes? Do they go above and beyond? And I once gave a trial project to someone whose resume was just impeccable. They delivered the work late. They didn't ask a single question. And even though parts of the brief were intentionally vague, I didn't hire them. And I saved months from myself. I saved months of frustration. So just to repeat, the red flags to watch out for: bad-mouthing previous employers. If they do it about others, they'll do it about you. Vague answers to very specific questions that you ask. This means that they're not either listening or they're hiding something. If they're overpromising, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Not asking you any questions means they might not care about the work, or that they didn't do the research before working with you. And I find that the last one is really huge. At the end of interviews, I always ask, what questions do you have for me? And the best candidates, they really have thoughtful questions about the work, about the vision, and how I like to operate. And the wrong candidates ask about vacation time and what they get paid, and they do. But here's what I wish I'd done that first time. I wish I'd ask, when you're working on something and realize it's not your best work, what do you do? Because the answer to that would have told me everything. Someone who says, well, I'd rather miss a deadline than send subpar work. That's often problematic for me too, because I say this all the time and I didn't invent it, but perfectionism is a form of procrastination. I'd love for somebody to check in about a work that they're doing or send in a draft and ask for early opinion than somebody who wants to be perfect. All right. That's all I have. That was a long one. But next week, we're going to be talking about onboarding, how to set someone up for success in those crucial first 90 days. But for now, I want you to take time out to write your screening questions and think about what you actually need to know about someone before you bring them into your creative world. And remember, I think that the goal really isn't to find someone who's perfect. It's to find someone who's really aligned with your work and what you're trying to do. So that's all I have. That's all I have for you, my friend. Enjoy your day. And thank you so much for tuning in to This Is How We Create. I'm looking forward to chatting with you next time. Hi there. I have a quick favor to ask you before you go. If you're loving this show, would you mind taking a quick second to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite go-to podcast app? Here's the thing. Those reviews are like magic fairy dust. They help other creatives of color discover our show and tap into their own artistic superpowers. While you're at it, why not subscribe to our Substack newsletter, Creative Matters? Creative Matters is like a weekly dose of inspiration delivered straight to your inbox. You can find the link to subscribe in the show notes. All right, that's all that I have for you today. I can't wait to see you on the next episode. Bye.